Hi guys, Olive here. Here today with the next installment in my ongoing series of videos all about the 90s PBS Kids TV show, Wishbone. In case you've never seen an episode of Wishbone, it was a half-hour television program, and every single episode was more or less split down the middle between two different storylines. The first storyline was always an adaptation of a work within the literary canon. So it could be an adaptation of a book, a short story, a play, a myth, a legend, a folk tale, anything like that. And then the other storyline focused on a family living in Texas with their pet Jack Russell Terrier Wishbone, and that real-life storyline always tied back to the story adaptation in some sort of a thematic way. In this series of videos I do here on my channel, I look at one episode of Wishbone per video, and I compare that episode to the source material, whatever literary work they decided to take on in that episode, and I compare them by asking some questions. What did they keep the same from the literary work? What did they change? Why did they make those choices? Was there any sort of moral message that they pulled out of the literary work to communicate to the young audience of Wishbone? Did they do that literary work justice? And then finally, the most important question of all, was it an entertaining episode to watch? In today's video, we will be looking at a late season 1 episode of Wishbone that is titled Viva Wishbone. It takes on the story of Our Lady of Guadalupe. Let's take a look. What's the story, Wishbone?
What's the story, Wishbone? What's this you're dreaming of?
At the start of this episode, Wishbone's owner Joe, his entire family, and all of his friends are getting ready for the arrival of a special guest. Senora Julia, who is essentially Joe's godmother, is driving in from Springfield. She helped with him when he was a baby and was there for the family after Joe's father died, so she is very important to them. After she arrives, we find out that Julia brought a gift for Joe. It's a book called The Legends of Mexico, which prompts Wishbone to start telling the story of the Aztec people and how they decided to settle in what we know today as Mexico. Meanwhile in Texas, Joe is finding himself a little jealous that his mom, Ellen, is becoming close with a young man named Michael who works at the library. Michael lost his mother recently, so Ellen is helping him with his college applications, and he bought her a pretty gift as a thank you. In response, Joe decides that he wants to get his mom an extremely expensive music box that she's been wanting from the antique store. He can't really afford it. He only can if he uses his entire life savings, but he really doesn't want his mom to forget about him. This really concerns Senora Julia that Joe feels the need to do this, so she sits him down and starts to tell him a story. The story of Juan Diego, who in this adaptation is played by Wishbone. On his way to Mass on a December morning, Juan Diego is greeted by the image of the Virgin Mary. She tells Juan Diego to go to the bishop, to tell him about this vision, and to tell him that the Holy Mother wants the people to build a temple for her on this hill where she first appeared, so that she can help people when they need her. Juan does as he's asked, but the bishop doesn't believe him. Juan Diego feels like he's failed, like if someone more important than him delivered the message, they'd be believed. But the Holy Mother instructs him to try again, and the bishop requests a sign that this is true. Juan Diego is then instructed by the Virgin Mary to go to the top of the hill and collect flowers that shouldn't be blooming in mid-December. When he takes the flowers back to the bishop, the image of the Holy Mother appears on the cloth they were carried in, and the temple is built in her honor. Back in the real-life storyline, Joe accidentally drops that very expensive music box, and after he can't get a refund for it, Julia encourages him to just tell his mom how he feels. He later makes a beautiful presentation to Wanda, Julia, and his mom, who he refers to as his 3 moms. It brings all 3 of them to tears. And when Michael, Ellen's friend, comes over for dinner, he offers to help Joe fix that music box. So let's talk about this episode. It definitely starts out more widely focused on Mexico, its history and its culture, but then we zoom in on this story, the story of Our Lady of Guadalupe. And in order to prepare myself for this episode, I read an English language translation of what's called the Nikan Mopua. I hope I pronounced that correctly. I have indeed been practicing. But it's supposed to be a secondhand account of Juan Diego's story, and it was originally written in the language of the Aztecs. The story of Our Lady of Guadalupe that we see in this episode is nearly identical to what I read. So it's definitely faithful, and if I do say so myself, it's a beautiful rendering of the story. Normally, when the writers of Wishbone are given a very short work to adapt, they do a beautiful job with it, and this was no exception. It is pretty obvious, though, that the real life storyline, that part of this episode, was built around the fact that the writers wanted to highlight Mexican culture. And I'd say half of that real life storyline, which is half of the episode, so a quarter total of this episode, was dedicated just to the introduction of the Senora Julia character. So not a whole lot happens plot-wise during that time, but I personally didn't mind that because Senora Julia, she has this warm presence. Anytime she's on screen, it's just so lovely. I love her interactions with Joe and his mom. You just immediately believe that they have history. The rest of that storyline seemed to come straight out of the moral message that they were pulling from Our Lady of Guadalupe, which seemed to me to be all about the healing power of love, particularly a mother's love. And that was really nice, even if the whole Joe gets jealous and then overspends on a music box plotline didn't really work for me. I've seen a lot of these episodes, and Joe has never struck me as the jealous type, and that storyline, it just didn't flow, in my opinion. But all in all, I do think this was a very inviting episode. Senora Julia just has that warmth about her. Anytime she's on screen, you feel like you are personally being given a hug. And I liked that. I think this was an episode that was much more full of love and reassurance than any kind of meaningful conflict that would have pushed a plot forward. But honestly, I'm perfectly fine with this being a cozy, comforting episode. But those were my thoughts on this episode of Wishbone. If you have any of your own that you would like to share, I'd love to hear from you in the comment section below. And if you would like to see any more of these episodes of What's the Story Wishbone, I have created a playlist that contains all the ones I've done in the past, will contain all the ones I do in the future, since I do have plans to talk about each and every one of them. So if you have a favorite episode of Wishbone, or if you just want to see what other ones I've talked about, I'll link that playlist for you in the description box below and up in the cards. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having a wonderful day. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.
Funding for Wishbone provided by annual financial support from PBS viewers like you.